All right.
Hello and welcome to 25 Cents, a video game podcast. I am Chris.
And I'm Nick. Each episode will be making the rounds through our four corners: console, PC, Apple, and tabletop, with a focus on games that are great to play if you've got kids.
You can find us wherever you listen to podcasts or on the web at Goodstuff.network. I was in the wrong window. That's right. Hotkeys only work if you have some hotkeys on a Mac, obviously, only work if you have them set up right and the browser or that window is the active window. Otherwise, you're just typing a number into a document.
You need what my friend Dan used to call focus follows brain. Just that like the computer does the thing that you meant to do.
Come on, Siri, you're smarter than this.
But yeah, sadly, computers are as smart as we make them, and we're not that smart.
Exactly. Yes.
So we've made it through our intro. I think we're gonna switch up the corners a little bit for reasons that will be revealed later. So I think Apple. You want to start off with Apple Corner?
Yeah, we might as well get. We don't have that one locked in, but we'll just use the car screeching effect for now as we screech into Apple Corner quickly. There's a whole bunch of new games.
There's tons of stuff.
And I didn't play any of them, and I see you didn't either.
No,
we're not doing.
There was a big dump. I think last Friday, I want to say, and funnily enough, my son has not. He mentioned that there are a few new games because he usually looks at the arcade releases when he has some iPad screen time on the weekends, but he didn't, seem to be interested in any of them, and actually was just back to Wonderbox again.
Oh, nice.
There's a couple ones that look kind of interesting. There's Hidden Folks, which is kind of like an animated Waldo or Wally if you're in the UK, I think, kind of game.
Yeah, that one actually. I did try this one just briefly because I thought it would actually be. My wife is kind of like the enigma of getting her into a game. It has to be a very specific little niche that she will be willing to try it. And I'm kind of just like, not because she needs more distractions on her phone, obviously, but it's more about like, hey, we're paying for Apple Arcade, you should use it or whatever. The budget brain side of my brain. Mm-hmm. And it is a fun. Not mindless isn't the right word because obviously you're using your brain trying to figure it out, but it's not a very difficult puzzle, but it is difficult, if that makes sense. Like you're looking for stuff in your patterns and stuff in the picture, and it's all grayscale, and so you're trying to find those things in the puzzle, like where's Waldo, like you said. But it's actually, I just realized it's from 2017 that it was the game of the year on the App Store, so it's a 5-year-old game that's now being repackaged for, as they've been doing, obviously for the Apple Arcade, which is kind of fun. So.
For the Plus games, and I see you have the banner loaded there that Apple Arcade now says play over 200 games, no ads,
right?
Which is, we've said as they build up the library, that's quite the value proposition, especially if you're someone who normally is playing the kind of free to play games that tempt you into spending $5 here or there. Throw that in with your bundle, add that for a month, and you get access to a lot of games.
Yeah, exactly.
A couple of the other Plus ones that they added was Bridge Constructor Plus. So this is another one. I never played this one when it was out previously. I had a different bridge simulation game that maybe has some similar gameplay called Polybridge that I enjoyed. What's funny to me with these bridge simulation games, and there's a few of them. I think there's even there's like a Walking Dead bridge simulator game, so you're like trying to
nice.
You're trying to build a bridge to like stop the zombies or escape the zombies or whatever.
Yeah.
But it reminds me of taking my intro to mechanics course in engineering school, and we had a bridge project, and you'd sit down at the lab computer and you'd simulate a truss bridge with, I don't know, maybe 20 members or something, fairly simple, and it would take several minutes to simulate and render the weight distributions, right? And now these little phone games, you can put hundreds of complicated truss elements in really random angles and combinations, and it just happily crunches the math and turns it into this little game, right? It's just one of those places where the absolute excess of compute power that we have available can be used with a little math behind the scenes to make some kind of fun games that are based on what used to be like supercomputer grade, tools for engineers and such.
Yeah. Yeah, this one actually is fun. I meant to introduce this to my kids actually because it is like, even if you don't play it a ton, it's just kind of like a easy way to get introduced to some of those engineering concepts even too, and obviously a very fun and not that you would build anything based off of your designs in here, but kind of way. But just like the same games that like youth groups or high school, whatever, like where you're trying to not crack an egg that you throw up in the air and those kinds of things. Just basic engineering issues that or problems that you're trying to solve, but in a fun way. And I remember playing this one. Or maybe it was, like you said, the other one, or one of many other ones that came out like it. And it's just kind of a fun game. And that's exactly like what you were saying with the Apple Arcade value proposition of just like have a game, play it for a week or 2 weeks or just a day, and that's fine. You're not really under any decision burden of like, is it worth it? Should I buy it? Is it going to be inundated with ads, etc.? So, yeah.
Yeah, and I'm noticing in the description it says includes expansion packs, right? So presumably the original non-plus version there were different in-app purchases to add different stuff to the game, but now you get the whole bundle, as part of Apple Arcade, which is another way of kind of how we've seen these old other business model games get transformed as part of the Plus reissue.
Visit the United Kingdom for the train. Nicely done. Crashlands Plus was another one that came out. Looks intense. I didn't try this one at all.
Yeah, so it said 2016. It won some awards back then. It's an action RPG. It kind of seems to fit like some of the other action RPGs that have come out on Apple Arcade so far. But again, they're just getting that library a little more robust, and they really seem to be focusing on the games that were, sort of critically acclaimed. They're at that age horizon where maybe their phone compatibility is starting to fall off, and Apple's inking the deals to resurrect those.
Mm-hmm. I wish I know there's nobody probably watching from Apple Arcade, but I wish that these links, these images, which are screenshots or videos sometimes from the games, were clickable so you could actually make them on a computer, make them bigger, and actually see them. That would be just like a nice little user experience improvement.
That's probably the store team, right?
Yeah. But even for like movies, like a movie that's got its list, I'm sure you can pop open the preview. Anyways, Nickelodeon Extreme Tennis. I saw a lot of ads for this one. Like, I don't know if it was just on my phone or on Twitter or all over social media. Like, obviously the Nickelodeon tie-in with all the characters, and then Extreme Tennis. I'm guessing this one would be pretty fun, just in the video game, tennis, not obviously very simulator heavy tennis that they're playing. Would be kind of fun, especially if you're into any of the characters, obviously. So, but this one, I didn't try it either. So,
yeah, I think this one might be fun to try with my son, because he really liked the table tennis and badminton modes in Mario at the Tokyo Olympics. So this is kind of similar.
Yep.
That said, he has no context on any of these Nickelodeon characters. I think he knows that SpongeBob is a TV character, but beyond that, doesn't really know any of these. And like, Hey Arnold is maybe more my age, or even like a year or two younger. I never had Nickelodeon really as a kid, so I didn't identify with some of these characters the way some of my peers did. But yeah, it's if you like these characters and you like a simple sport game, it looks like a good one, and it's part of this long ongoing Nickelodeon deal that's part of Apple Arcade, because we've seen several games now with tie-in.
Yeah, and it's actually one of the only ones, at least of the list so far that we've looked at, that's actually also Apple TV capable. So, for what it's worth, I guess, which makes sense. It would be a fun one to play on Apple TV, whereas maybe the Bridge Constructor is a little more awkward to control and whatever, and doesn't have native controls, if that's the right word.
Those kind of games definitely feel very touch first, right? You're manipulating complicated objects on screen. That makes sense as a touch based game that wouldn't come to Apple TV.
Yeah. Have you heard about Wordle at all? Is that something?
Yeah. I think if I look at
Oh,
the
I'm not gonna.
family text thread, Twitter, every Discord I'm in, Wordle is everywhere. It's taking the world by storm. We were really excited about all of the Wordle clones that we talked about last episode, and then something happened
Yeah.
to to sort of end the fun. Maybe um,
Well,
it Mr. Wardle sold Mr. Wardle, the developer of Wordle, sold the game
yeah,
to the
and
New
to the
York
New York Times. And
Times.
so, interesting side note that I was just a happy coincidence. A podcast is a client of mine that I edit. They called Syntax.fm. So if you go to obviously Syntax.fm, I think the episode is coming out. What is today? It'll be as well. Actually, it'll be out by the time you're listening to this. If you're recording or you're listening, not listening live, on the February 9th, Wednesday, February 9th, it's out. And so it's a very tech web development focused podcast, but Josh happens to be a listener of this podcast. And so he wrote in and said, hey, I'd love to talk to you guys about Wordle and how I developed it and the tech stack I use. And it happened to be the day after he sold sold it to the New York Times. So he's like, yes, let's do that. And let's also make sure we, get this episode out sooner than later, because it was supposed to be, I think, next week or whatever, but obviously might as well.
Right.
But I'm happy to say, in listening to his conversation, I would really encourage you to go listen to it later when it comes out. But if there was ever like a non-sleazy dude to sell or person to sell something to the New York Times for low seven figures and hopefully make the game continue in a healthy way, he seems like the kind of person who would like to do that. Of course, that being said, everything can get corrupted by enough digits in
Yeah.
after. But even just tackling things, I'll just, I guess, tease a little bit of it in terms of, like he sold them the slash domain for the game, because the game is at his website /Wordle. So he sold them just the slash of Wordle. He didn't sell them his home domain. So he still maintains control of power
Interesting.
something, whatever it's called, that domain, and then they'll put some sort of redirect or whatever. But then they also had to account for things like the fact that your score and your streak and your history with the game is in local browser storage. So not even, as you may have noticed, if you're playing on your computer and then you go to your phone, all of a sudden it's like you're a brand new player, or even switch browsers on a computer. And so that's all part of the design to keep it light, easy to use, or easy to develop for. Because obviously, as you may have heard, he didn't develop this to be this mass success. And so that's part of the deal, is like you have to have that address still in order to be able to access local storage, where people have, weeks of a streak built up and they're going to be angry if the New York Times all of a sudden takes over and then that
Right.
streak is gone or whatever. So anyways, all to say, I feel like I understand completely the concern about this game is going to be corrupted by ads or whatever they might put into it. And it may eventually be that. But yeah, it's at least happened to a nice guy.
Yeah, I suspect it'll be part of the New York Times like puzzle subscription you can get, for crosswords and that honeybee word game they have. I'm forgetting the name of, and some of the other stuff, right? So maybe Wordle will be the free one to get you in the door, or it'll be part of that package. If people decide to stick with it. I think I saw a few folks on like Twitter making the point like, hey, this was his creator opportunity to cash out, right? There's lots of ways that a trend, a really popular viral trend, can end, and this one at least, benefits the creator and his family to a financial degree, and he doesn't have to deal with it anymore. It's created, it's in the world, and he's kind of detached from it for the most part. But yeah, I think I'm a little bit sad because it seemed like this moment of sort of like, sort of pure fun, open web developer stuff. But yeah, like you said, it sounds like he's tried very hard to kind of maintain that, and it's also the case that like it's a pretty relatively trivial, like the game idea isn't trivial, but it's not a lot of code. So I feel like Wordle and Wordle clones will probably be something that we see showing up in like class projects and
Yeah.
job interview questions and that sort of thing, right? Like because of some of the aspects of what makes it such a simple and clean game experience. And speaking of clones, I've found a few more. I don't know if you've tried any of these.
Yeah. The funny one is Not Nerdle. Sorry, that's the one you're. There's one a hockey name Gordle or something like that. It's like a hockey
Oh,
player name
I
generator.
missed that one.
And so what was really funny is I literally, this is just a bit of like serendipity, but like I was editing the episode, they started talking about Wordle clones with him, and they said this hockey one, and then my wife actually texted me like within minutes about this same clone because someone at her work was talking about this Wordle clone that has hockey player. Anyways, it was just kind of a funny little bit of coincidence. But and the other thing I was going to mention is that he speaking of like maintaining the game, the actual cost of the game, he's like it's like $100 a month for his Amazon S3 or whatever buckets and things to host the game. So it's very minimal, but just the ongoing stress and overload of carrying this thing that the like 10 million people a month are
Right.
playing or whatever.
I have to, because yeah, it's just basically a static web page and some JavaScript, so the bandwidth and storage costs are pretty low, but the support costs I imagine are pretty, astronomical. I mean, I if you think of the angry tweets about like, oh, I can't believe, like rebus isn't a very good word, like no one knows that word, right? Like
Yeah.
just thinking of all of the email and messages that he had to deal with just because of which word he picked for a given day, or maybe it was even just random. I forget if he's described how he
Yeah, he
selected
talks
the word
about that
list, but
in there too in the
yeah.
episode. Yeah, it is interesting because he put it in like it's because again he developed it for him and his girlfriend, and then so he wanted to be able to play the game, so he did this massive array. They went through it and figured out like which words are actually dumb words that shouldn't really be in there that aren't really known words, and then randomized it and then tried to forget. so
Yeah.
so he could play the game obviously and with his girlfriend.
Right.
So anyway, yeah, Nerdle, Quirtle.
But yes. Yeah. So speaking of, you mentioned hockey player names, but
Yeah.
I also found a friend of mine who's big in Star Wars communities found Star Wordle, which is 5-letter or 6-letter Star Wars character names. I found this one very difficult because I know some Star Wars trivia, but like there's some deep cuts in this one. So if you're not a huge consumer of Wikipedia,
Yeah.
you are not going to have a lot of success with this one, probably.
Oh, this is Star Wordle is Star Wars or
Yes, Star Wars.
Sorry,
yeah.
I was thinking Star Trek.
Yeah.
I'm getting ahead of myself
I,
here.
I'm sure someone will create a Star Trek Wordle. But yeah, and then Nerdle is math equations, so maybe a good educational one. And Quordle is like Dordle, except you play 4 boards at once with a single guess instead of. And I found that one very challenging.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think the fuel for this trend seems to still be burning, at least for a little while. I still see a lot of people posting about it, even now, almost over a week after the acquisition announcement. So yeah, it's kind of fun to just see. Like I've always loved word games, and seeing Wordle sort of still be in the consciousness for a while. It's like it seems like one of those things that kind of hit that pandemic brain sweet spot of like it's this collective moment.
Yeah, definitely. All right. Well, we've spent probably more than our allotted time on that one, so let's move on to Tabletop Corner.
We need some dice
Speaking of-
rolling or something.
Yeah, speaking of randomized sounds that I
Yeah. Yeah.
there you go. Sounds like my tabletop.
So tabletop corner, I think we've punted on for a few episodes. Not a lot of news or new things that I've tried, at least. I saw Asmodee, which is one of the big tabletop game companies. They also own Fantasy Flight and a couple other brands. Is being purchased by something called the Embracer Group. So I think this is just like kind of a reinvestment portfolio thing. My son and I have been playing some more Dominion lately. He really likes the deck building and creating a deck in which you can basically play the so-called engine strategy, where you can play as many cards as you can. And you just keep drawing and keep drawing and keep drawing, even if it doesn't result in a win. He really just likes playing that way, which is fun. And then I saw Rob Davio, who's the creator of Pandemic and related spin-offs, is running this company called Restoration Games, and they have been buying up the licenses of games that are out of print from like the 80s and 90s.
Oh, nice.
And republishing them, repackaging them, maybe updating the mechanics to sort of more modern Euro game sensibilities. So I'd seen that Fireball Island, which I remember seeing the TV ads for back in late 80s, early 90s, was reissued, but I just assumed it was like, Hasbro or somebody putting out, whoever owned the license was re-releasing it. But it's actually this Restoration Games project that, he's kind of running as part of. He's obviously an incredibly successful board game designer, huge name in the industry, and now he's kind of taking on this passion project of resurrecting, restoring classic board games that have fallen out of favor, which I think is pretty cool.
That is very cool. We've I see in your notes here you overdosed on Villainous, or maybe it's my old notes. I don't know.
I think that's your old note.
Yeah. Anyways,
we haven't played any lately. Yeah.
Yeah, we definitely overdosed on that over the holidays. So it's and I think almost to the point where we've just abandoned board games completely for a little while. I think we just did the holiday thing, and then also getting COVID and whatever, and just kind of like, all right, everything reminds us of like a month ago when we were all sick and gross, and so let's just take a complete break from that. So
yeah, stuck inside together. Yeah. So what have you been playing instead?
Well, nothing board game related. We actually can move on to console corner because that's definitely where we're. Let's see, no, that's not the right one. At any rate,
all right, we'll workshop the soundboard. Yeah, there we go.
If you've got ideas for sounds for our corners, please send them in to our Twitter account, 25C Arcade. We can definitely love to hear from you. No, the thing that's actually I fall back on is Fortnite as a nice. Fortnite dad. I think, trying to be like not completely lame with my kids, because it is like a thing we've talked about many times here, where like the instant gratification hit of playing Fortnite is great for the kids and great for me as well in a busy time. And so it's also frustrating because any sort of deeper knowledge game, Civilization, Warcraft 3, etc., like we've talked about, is also just kind of like feels too much work almost, in a sense,
right,
in the allotted time that you have. And it is really like Fortnite, like you've said, is very sticky, and it just like our kids keep kind of like this. Latest season is all about Spider-Man skins and unlocking Spider-Man skins, as well as then the Rock sort of character who's Dominion guy or whatever is at the top of it, and that's what they just unlocked finally. And so for me, it's like 3 goals each season when it refreshes is like unlocking the entire map, so just visiting the map and ungraying it or whatever, so you've been everywhere. And then I've gotten a little bit into the quests of it, like just random things you're supposed to do in the game to do it, to unlock and finish, and that's what technically unlocks you if you pay for the battle pass, and unlocks more skins, etc. But I just skip that part, and then of course just having fun with my kids when and if they let me play with them and they're not embarrassed.
Do you kind of hold back the team a little bit with the dad handicap?
Well, a little bit, because you go into trios or whatever they call it now, and so then it is just more complicated. When it's just 2, I think it's a lot easier to like exactly what the other person's doing. You're not trying to like keep track of someone runs off in a different way, and then you have to like go rescue them or whatever. But it is funny watching just the personalities within my kids. Of like, if I can hear them when they're playing together often, and one person will die and they'll be like, "Oh, how did you die? Oh man, now you died," or whatever. Like they're getting mad at the other guy for dying. But then the response to someone dying is sometimes like my one son will often like go try and save them first and then get shot in the process, right? Whereas the other son will like boot it out of the way, like out of the area out of the danger zone or whatever, and say, "I'm going to come back and get you. Don't worry." But then inevitably doesn't actually get around to getting back and getting him, and they both just get sort of frustrated with each other for their lack of help in death or fake death, and because you can actually take your reboot card and take it to a van and reboot somebody in the game, and so then you can kind of come back into the game, which is kind of a neat mechanic for keeping the game going, obviously. But yeah, at any rate, that's the update lately, and then we also play a bit of hockey still. NHL 22 is a lot of fun for the 3 of us playing, and so.
Is there any sort of conflict resolution between the kids, whether it's like resolving, hey, you let me die in Fortnite, or the team play in hockey, or is it mostly okay?
It's mostly okay. It's funny because in hockey, any sort of many sports games, it's actually it's fun to play together, but if it's like two people on one side, two people or one person in our case on the other side, it's actually better being the single person, because then you don't have to worry about someone taking over a player that you're passing to, right? You know that you're always going to be the one controlling every player. And so there's a bit of like delay in when you're playing with somebody. And I don't know how you ever overcome that. Maybe some people, like, you can lock yourself to being only the left winger or only the center player or whatever. And so then you can only, you know who you're going to be, and you're not going to pass it to someone who isn't you or might be you. But that's some of the bigger issues of just like, yeah. And like one kid being better than the other, obviously. Luckily with Fortnite, I'm the worst. And so I can take the beating. Whereas in hockey, actually, I'm usually one of the better ones. And so then they can kind of fight over who's the worst. And sometimes that leads to hurt feelings because someone loses more. But at any rate, that's hockey for you. So,
we need to take a brief detour into we were wrong corner in the context of acquisitions. So I think I said on our last episode, like, oh yeah, Microsoft owns Bungie, which is incorrect. Microsoft owns the Halo franchise through their subsidiary, was it 365 Industries or whatever? Because the other big news since we last recorded is Sony buys Bungie, which actually kind of makes sense from a Destiny 2 PlayStation, play, right? And that Sony maybe doesn't have like a premier developer like this. So yeah, that's an interesting big news on the heels of other big game company acquisitions.
Yeah, and there's something about, I don't know what it is, and maybe it's just because I know Kyle and Kenny of Morning Show fame here on Good Stuff. They play a lot of Destiny, or used to play a lot of Destiny. I don't know if they still do. And it for me, and they happen to be on PlayStation, and for me, it's always been sort of like a PlayStation game in my mind for some reason.
Right.
Even though it's not, it's cross-platform, and you can get it for Xbox, etc. But it does feel like for whatever reason in my brain anyways, it's always made sense that it's a PlayStation platformer, and so this kind of, it was kind of funny because we had recorded, and then we were talking about it in our Discord, and there was some disagreement about who actually owned Halo and who actually owns Bungie, or whether they're and then within hours I think of that argument or conversation, the announcement came that Sony was buying them. So for $3.6 billion, which obviously is a lot less than Microsoft buying Activision for $68 billion, but it's, I think, what's the old measure? That's three Instagrams basically. So if we're still using Instagram as
I think that was because Instagram was bought by Facebook for $1 billion, right?
Yeah,
roughly. It's big money moving around and big consolidation in the game space. I think the other Halo thing that was interesting is the trailer for the live action, or another trailer for the live action Halo TV series that's coming out on Paramount Plus soon, came out, and it looks very like generic sci-fi action at a glance, but and the trailer is like very like they do like a slowed down cover of
We're mech.com. We're building a metaverse game where every single player owns
any trailer
a mech
these days, especially,
inside
has
of
to have like a slow version of an old music, old 70s or 80s song.
But I'll probably watch it because I'm paying for Paramount Plus for Star Trek, as I've said, because they have a whole plan of many TV series over the course of the year that we've been enjoying. The other Star Trek game news is Star Trek Resurgence had a trailer. So I heard about this on a Star Trek podcast I listened to called Transporter Lock. And so this is Telltale Games famously kind of just like completely imploded a couple years ago as a game studio. But for a while, they were just churning out all these great licensed story games where kind of a modern version of point-and-click adventure, right? And a lot of them were really good. I played some of the Walking Dead one. I played some of the Game of Thrones one. And so some alumni from that studio have a new studio, and they got the Trek license, and they're doing a narrative adventure. So if you know Star Trek timelines, it's set after the Next Generation movies that came out in the 90s. Around the same time as the currently airing animated show Lower Decks, and no connection to the so-called Kelvin timeline movies, which are the 3 that came out with Chris Pine. So anyway, it fits into the whole Star Trek history. I'm pretty excited because it looks like it'll be a lot of fun, and it's going to be on Epic Game Store and PlayStation and Xbox. And based on the previous Telltale games, it'll probably be several hours of kind of story gameplay, lots of video and dialogue and story choices, and at least for me, Trek it's big about the story, right, not the action. So I'm pretty excited to see this one when it comes out. But I was kind of thinking I need to kind of transport us over to another universe, the Star Trek universe, take over the show for a little bit.
Is that the cue for
yes.
the audio? Okay, here we go.
This is a takeover. This is a takeover of 25 cents. It's a hostile takeover of 25 cents. It is now 25 slips of gold pressed latinum. And I just wanted to talk a little bit about the many, many, many Star Trek games that have come out over the years. Video games, some the board games and card games, and I linked to the Wikipedia list of Star Trek games in the show notes. But I've actually played more of these than I realized, but also not nearly as many as there are, and that I might have been interested in had I not been playing other stuff at the time. Yeah. So I don't know. Have you played any Star Trek games? You're not a big Star Trek viewer, I know.
Yeah, it's one of those things where it was like a choice of, I had friends who were big into Star Trek in high school and stuff, and I definitely watched a lot of Next Generation just because it was what was on at the time, and even into Deep Space Nine and into what was the one with Scott Bakula? Is that the guy?
Enterprise. Yeah.
Enterprise. That's where I dropped off in terms of TV watching, and then also watched all the movies, the newer, what's that called? Like the 8 or whatever that came out with Next Generation cast. Tangential or 6 or whatever it is.
Yeah, so there were four next gen movies.
Okay.
So that's Generations, First Contact, Insurrection, and Nemesis.
Yeah, so that hit right at my sweet spot of like going to movies and with friends and whatever time period, and then definitely saw the newer ones as well. What did you call them? The
Kelvin
timeline.
Because it starts at the beginning of the 2009 movie with the USS Kelvin encountering a time anomaly, and that's what resets so it's off in its own little universe, separate from the main history that Trek fans obsess over.
Yeah. So definitely I'm very aware culturally, and even just like I guess a lazy Star Trek fan in terms of like I would know more about Star Wars because I've spent more time in that universe, but generally speaking, and I haven't played a lot of the games as I'm looking through the list. But I even having been working at a computer store when a lot of them came out in the 2000s, let's say, and being aware of just like having to sell them to people as a thing, but definitely didn't spend a lot of time playing them. But appreciate the even like watching the trailer for that new game. Like I can appreciate the idea of like seeing the media or the characters or whatever and getting to walk through that in a game format is like the ultimate nerd fun, right? Like, and that's definitely, I can totally appreciate how fun it is, regardless of how good the game even is, which sometimes clouds, whether it's actually a great game.
But yeah, and famously, I mean, a couple of the ones on this list were like notoriously bad games, like just pilloried in the game press as like a cheap tie-in. I think there was an Xbox game that tied in with the first of the new Chris Pine movies in 2009 that was just famously terrible.
Right.
So Star Trek slapping their name on things. I think. There's an interesting mix, right? So there's the games where you're playing basically as the main characters from one of the shows, and then there's the games where you're playing as in the Trek universe, right? So you maybe encounter via cameo the main characters that you know and love, but you're kind of doing your own side story that maybe is important or maybe not to the sort of big picture plot of all the games. And of course, many of these games go back into like early fan history because, unsurprisingly, when Star Trek was off the air and there weren't any movies in the 70s and there was this huge fan community, a lot of those fans were early computer programmers, and so they were creating these early fan games that were unofficial for various platforms. obviously being a little younger than that, I didn't encounter a lot of these. I have this vague memory of a Star Trek ship simulator game, and based on the list, I think it's this one called Begin 2 that I played once when for some reason I had to go to like daycare in sort of an emergency situation. Like my dad, who was usually at home at that age, wasn't available, or something came up at school for him, and so I was at this daycare, but I was a lot older than any of the other kids. And so they just set me up on the PC that was in the house, and I was playing the Star Trek game. I just have this memory of that.
Yeah.
But the first one I got was, I think you had the page up earlier, was Star Trek 25th Anniversary. And this is one of the classic point-and-click adventure games, and you are playing as the original series crew during the original series time period. So Kirk, Spock, and McCoy, and others. There's a little bit of an action element for ship battles. And actually, if you remember the era of copy protection for games, the way the copy protection for this worked is the official game manual had a star map. And when you wanted to go on any mission, you had to navigate to the right star system using the game manual. You couldn't figure it out from in the game. And if you navigated to any other star system, a super powerful Romulan cruiser would show up and blow you up. So that was the copy protection.
That's awesome.
You couldn't progress in the game unless you had the official game manual.
Yeah. That's brilliant.
So I remember that one. We got that when we had a DOS computer at home, but it wasn't new enough to play the game. And I somehow convinced my grandma, who at the time operated a small bath and sundry shop, to let me install the game on her like point of sale PC that was at her store after hours. And that's how I played a bit of it. And then later I got the CD-ROM version for Mac, which it was the same game, but they got all the actors to record dialogue for it, which is pretty cool. And then I also had the sequel called Judgment Rights, which is basically the same game, just more missions. But yeah, those are fun.
I like that one of the criticisms of the game originally was the hour-long install of the 9-megabyte game onto a hard drive. Which is like, it's just the same thing now. I criticize like, it takes an hour to update when you install a brand new game. You have to like download these updates. And
it's like, five terabytes of models. Yeah.
The scale is different, but it's the same complaint. So, and I think of the like problem. Parents, just that idea of the tangent of like parents letting their kids install things on their office. Like I barely let my kids even touch my computer, because it's like, it's just that ignorance that what parents had or business owners or whatever had of like how powerful a computer actually was and what was at stake if their kids messed something up. Like, but yeah, anyways.
Yeah, I think it was a different era. I mean, I remember, I think I mentioned I played like Doom on my friend's dad's like university lab computers, right? Like, because some grad student convinced the professor to like let them install Doom. Like, that's a terrible idea, and no IT department would allow it now. But yeah, tearing through a couple other quick games that I played briefly. There was a next generation game for SNES that one of my good friends, Gus, he was another huge Trek fan, and he and I were like big Trek fans together. But he had a Super Nintendo and he had this game, but I never got very far in it because like I think every time I went over to his house, I just played like the first mission maybe.
Right.
But it was cool because when you were on the like menu, it was like you were on the bridge of the Enterprise D, which is Next Generation, which is kind of my main Star Trek. So that was fun. And I somehow bought, I think used, this Deep Space Nine Harbinger CD-ROM game that it had this kind of weird like box design that was like this, like a Cardassian window from the space station or something. I think I got stuck in it, and it was kind of before the era of walkthroughs on the internet a little bit, or I didn't know how to find them.
Yeah.
But then the next big one was, and I think actually one of the best Star Trek games, ironically, is Star Trek Voyager Elite Force. It does not seem like a first-person shooter makes sense in Star Trek, because it's a universe where there's a lot of diplomacy and technobabble and talking and negotiating. But they took the Quake 3 engine and they made a really, really good Trek shooter.
Mm-hmm.
And the premise is like the ship is stuck in some anomaly with a bunch of other aliens, so you have to keep going on to all these other alien ships and figure out how to escape the big bad aliens that are the real threat, right? And it is another one of those games where they had all the original actors record dialogue, so that's like a very immersive fan experience. I think they didn't get Jerry Ryan to play Seven of Nine, but if you bought the expansion pack, it came with her audio. So they like replaced whatever voice actress they had with the one from the who had played the character on the show.
Yeah.
But yeah, it was a fun it's a fun game. I did beat the first one at some point. And yeah, it's weird that a shooter fits in Star Trek, but it's well done. And the multiplayer is kind of silly because you're running around with like a quantum torpedo launcher and blowing each other up, right?
Yeah, is it like set in the like pretending to be in the holodeck, so it's not like even within the mechanics of the game, they're not like really killing each other. It's just pretend we're in the VR version.
It's supposed to be like it's supposed to be like a training exercise on the holodeck when you're playing multiplayer.
Yeah.
And then I wasn't playing a lot of games other than between college and World of Warcraft. I wasn't playing a wide variety of games. I did briefly get Star Trek Conquest. It was a Wii game that I won in a contest at an early tweet up in Boston. And it's this weird like kind of strategy system taking game, and it does not make any sense on the Wii. I mean, you're like trying to use the Wiimote to like select systems to attack, and it was just a weird port. And then the only other non-mobile game on the list that I tried was Star Trek Online, which I remember seeing their booth at one of the early PAX expos. And I was really excited about it because it really felt like, you get to fly a ship, you get to go on away missions, it's an MMO. And I did play it for a little while. I think I actually shelled out for the like lifetime subscription unlock. But the company got acquired and they ended Mac support at some point. So I just stopped playing. I think I tried dual booting once or twice into Windows, but it's just so much effort. I didn't keep playing it. But it's still under, active development. They're putting out expansions. I even heard an ad for the latest expansion on one of the Star Trek podcasts I listen to.
Which
so
is impressive.
It's been out now since 2010, and it's still going. We're kind of past the age of MMOs in a lot of ways, right? But this one, I think the Star Trek aspect of it makes it sticky for a select crowd.
Yeah. Very sticky.
Which includes me.
Yeah. Which that's where it's beautiful about like the internet, obviously, and being able to find your crew or the people, and then also have things made for you as in your niche or your crew or whatever your interest area, and like that's what's awesome. And even just when it gets to that level of like Star Trek, even licensing, being able to maintain assumingly a viable some sort of business around it for this long is very impressive, and that it continues on to this day. So very cool.
Yeah, and I think the Star Trek universe in general, it's very easy to it's the whole galaxy basically, and there's all these like aliens and worlds and stuff that you can reference from the various shows and movies. So it's very easy to have this sprawling story going on that doesn't really interact except cursorily with the main characters that everyone knows, but you can kind of explore the kind of the background that is out there if you're really into the show. So I think that's pretty cool. And then there've been a bunch of Trek licensed mobile games that have come out that I've tried over the years. There was Star Trek Rivals, which was a kind of collectible card game type thing that tied in with the newer movies, the three Kelvinverse movies. I remember playing it for a little while. It was okay, but it just it was one of those games where eventually you run into you got to start paying a lot of money to get the best cards, or put in a huge amount of time to get the best cards. There was Star Trek Trexels, which is this kind of pixel art simulation game that I tried briefly. I don't really remember much about it. Star Trek Timelines, I think I've mentioned on the show before, I had been playing a bunch right up until Apple Arcade launched. And this is like a free-to-play game. I was paying real money to, get upgrades and unlocks and, mission currency and all that stuff. What was fun about this one, right, was you were kind of in the world and they were doing little tie-in adventures with the currently airing TV shows and all that stuff. So you can kind of see the business side of it. But it's also one of those absolutely worst kind of in-app purchase things where it's like every day there's a special quest and you can only unlock the new character if you do the quest every day for 2 weeks and that
Yeah.
kind of thing. So and then finally, I think Star Trek Legends we talked about on episode 29, which is an Apple Arcade title that I've not continued playing lately. But
So it's not because it's not good enough to like warrant going back into, because presumably, just like you were saying with some of the other stuff, even if the game isn't amazing, it's still Star Trek, and so it's fun to play. But this one doesn't even sort of hit that bar.
I think for the reason why Legends didn't grab you, so you get all the characters, but the gameplay was very, very repetitive. At least when I played it, like it was pretty much, grab your crew, use the same kind of sequence of actions for every battle, and you win easily.
Right.
So yeah, that's why it wasn't fun as a game, even being able to see like all of the sort of the characters you know and love.
Mm-hmm.
I think if my abstract life goal is to someday have the Star Trek The Next Generation pinball game, but I don't live in a house that has room for that. I don't have a basement or a garage. That's kind of I think that would be a really cool thing to have as a collector.
You could build have your kid's bed be on top of the pinball and then just like Murphy bed it up, out of the way.
Oh, there you go. Yeah, just this is Daddy's room now.
Yeah. You're gone to school.
Yeah.
I play pinball.
Yeah. Someday. And then the other ones I wanted to touch on were more in the tabletop area, but this one's kind of a weird one because it's almost like, I don't know, it's like a board game, interactive media. It's a very, very niche period of technology, right? So this is Star Trek The Next Generation, interactive VCR board game, a Klingon challenge. And so it's a board game, but you put a VHS tape in the player, and the board game at various points will tell you to like fast forward to time codes. And then
bizarre.
things happen on the screen, and you're supposed to react to what the character says. I played it once at a family friend's house as a kid, and it was one of those things that just kind of lodged in my brain as like this amazing, awesome interactive idea. And then my wife Annerly got it for me for my birthday a couple years ago, and we've played it a few times. It does not age as well as maybe my childhood memories of it are, but it is a fun collector's item.
So wait,
we obviously don't have a V8.
Oh yeah.
No. I found a copy of the video on the back of a truck and and have it in digital form.
Which makes a whole lot more sense, obviously. But yeah, such was the technology in the early 90s that they thought, we'll send everyone a tape. And
and they clearly intend, I mean, if you read the rules and stuff, they clearly intended that you'd buy the base game and then you'd buy like new tapes of new episodes that would have a different story but the same sort of game mechanics. And that never happened. This was the only one that was ever released.
Right.
But yeah, it's interesting too because they filmed all the video sequences like on the sets of the show that was filming at the time. So it's just this bizarre mid-90s artifact that I don't think there's really an equivalent that I know of.
Well, looking back, it feels like, not to go too far down a different trail, but like it almost feels like this like distraction that we have now with NFT stuff with celebrities. It's like VCRs are the next big thing, and we're gonna sell tapes, and then we'll make expansion packs, and just seeing the money, we're just rolling in because all you have to do is just film the show, and people will lap it up or whatever, not missing the fact that this technology is going to just get decimated in the next couple of years. But anyways,
I think that's true, that there is that sort of gold rush mentality for some of these. Another one that was like that was probably the Star Trek customizable card game, which I put too much of my allowance money into at one point. and had a lot. I still have some of my cards, but yeah, this was Magic the Gathering had gotten huge for the first time. It seemed to be just like everywhere at my middle school, which was the age I was at the time, and every single licensed property started churning out collectible card games. So there's a Star Trek one. I also played a Star Wars one. And there were, I mean, it was just dozens. It was this glut of them. And again, it was that same idea, right? It's like, well, we get the kids in the door with the licensed branding, and then they're going to buy 10 or 15 card booster packs, every week with their allowance for the rest of their lives, kind of thinking, right? And the eyeballs roll back into money bags in your head.
Yeah. And then finally, the one that might be most accessible these days in terms of a board game is the Star Trek Catan one, which we've talked about a few times. And you do own, right? You've played.
Yes. Yeah.
And has it been? It's like 2012 properties when it came out. It looks like, but that's still the most. It's not like they update it with new characters or anything.
There's one expansion which is a new map set. So instead of being the standard Settlers like kind of random hexes, it's a map that's of the galaxy with like the worlds from the world of Star Trek, Romulus and Vulcan and so forth. Right. But yeah, it's pretty solid. It's kind of set in the original series movies from the 80s timeline. And as I've said before, the way the Bridge Crew character cards work in the game really fixes some of the randomness of a base game of Settlers, because you can generally have a card power that will help you, like if you haven't rolled anything good in a while. Mm-hmm. But yeah, so there is. I think until I really looked through this list, I had no idea just how many Star Trek games there have been and continue to be. I think you can kind of hear my favorites are very much centered in my like early teenage years, I guess, when I kind of first was able to start choosing what games I was going to play, and was pretty into Star Trek at the time. And now you can kind of hear the phases too of like the style of game. There was this big PC based adventure period, and then and now we're in the mobile in-app purchase tie-in period, and at various points there've been simulators, and I like there's that Bridge Crew game where you play as like an officer in VR on the bridge, and that sounds really cool, right? Mm-hmm. I think we've talked about that on a previous episode, and many other strategy games and whatnot, all in between. So it's a reminder of a phrase I've heard, which is Star Trek is a place, right? So you can kind of take all these different game genres, similar to what we've seen with like Star Wars games, right, and bolt them into the universe pretty easily. You can have flying ships, you can have shooting aliens, you can have complicated strategy, just story, all and everything in between.
Yeah, it's a kind of a testament too to the fact that Star Trek, like we alluded to earlier, is based around the idea of diplomacy and not non-violence, almost, right? And
generally,
and then also it's not like it's massive ship battles either. It's not like you have like even Star Wars is generally like there's diplomacy and there's one-on-one sort of individual battles, but then they can zoom out very quickly to like massive ship battles or whatever, right? And that's not, at least to my experience with Star Trek, is not the same either. It's generally like 3 ships are kind of like lumbering around in space to try and fight, and so that doesn't translate well to a video game in on paper anyways, or whatever, in terms of like being a super fun game to play where you're just like sitting in the, but I could totally see if you're a Star Trek nerd, VR version of like sitting in the captain's chair and hitting buttons and ordering your crew to go get the phasers started or whatever.
Right.
All the terms, but like that would be a fun thing to do, and you would happily shell out $100 for a VR game that lets you do that. And so, but yeah, just looking at the list of like how many, there's like games that came out almost every year. We're skipping a few here and there, but like there's been new games almost every year, even if the Star Trek show is not on or new shows aren't on or whatever. Testament to the property, I guess, that they've been able to do that, and yeah, kudos to them.
Yeah, I think I recently did the calculation that this year there's so much new Star Trek coming to Paramount Plus. It's almost all Paramount Plus exclusives. It's the first time we've had this much Star Trek since like 1999, when multiple TV series were airing on, at the time in the U.S., UPN, and that's just kind of it's interesting that it's something that they, I guess, Paramount and CBS, who own Trek, realize it's a property that they can put a lot of money into and turn into a whole big multimedia empire again. With this long history, of course.
Yeah.
So I'm sure we will see more games coming out over the next few years, especially with the TV shows picking up. I don't know. So there's one of the new TV shows is animated and specifically for kids, Prodigy, and they just wrapped their like mid-season finale, and I'll be curious to see if that ends up being a something that they base some games on more for kids. That's also a Nickelodeon property, so hey, maybe we'll even see an Apple Arcade tie-in there.
Yeah, it's interesting because just even bigger picture of like culturally, like I don't know what you're feeling, but like on Disney Plus, they have a lot of obviously new Star Wars shows coming out. There's Marvel shows that are coming out, and it feels like there's potentially a bit of fatigue for new content in a weird kind of way. And I kind of reflect back on like the 2000s or even 90s. It felt like, at least for us, where we were remote from long ways from Hollywood or anything like that, obviously, but like just as we were starting to get into something, all of a sudden it would just die out, like the show or the whatever. And because they didn't really have a feet on the ground sense of what was actually selling. It was so delayed, right? Whereas now they know, well, people are signing up for Disney Plus. Let's do another show. Let's keep it going, keep the machine going, or Paramount Plus or whatever. They have a much more urgent, or what's the word, or like time sensitive or quick response, I guess, to knowing there's money for this. Let's keep going. Whereas in our teenage years, my teenage years anyways, for sure, there was like a 6-month lag when they would find out that, oh, nobody's buying Tickle Me Elmo dolls now or whatever. But even like Star Wars or Star Trek stuff would just stop selling, and they didn't know why, and so then it just was abandoned for years. Whereas, yeah, I'm just curious to see what kind of the world that our kids grow up in with this like infinite buffet of nerd fun stuff. That are they going to grow up in their 20s and be like, ugh, I just want like a boring cheesy sitcom that doesn't have like world building involved. It's just like like this sort of
and I think Game of Thrones a lot obviously had some issues kind of with the ending of the series, but that was like that cultural moment, and now there's all these other epic fantasy series that are book based or game based that have been coming out, and it's like you gotta like when I was a little Trek nerd, like memorizing the technical manual as a kid because I was bored, I guess, and really into made up technology. That there is a fairly mainstream interest in knowing like who the prince of some side kingdom is and where all of the territories are, and wanting to go and read like the tie-in books or play a tie-in game and really be immersed in the experience. And kind of how is there sort of like the nerd tier and the mainstream tier, and it's certainly weird to me that there are these mostly sci-fi or fantasy franchises that are hugely cultural powerhouses, right? And of course it's all owned by Disney or somebody else, right? But
these mega corporations,
yeah, it's an interesting moment that the sort of the nerd stuff has very much taken over in a lot of ways, and can make a ton of money for somebody.
Yeah, exactly. My son. We went to Costco and he came along and I was like, "Well, do you want to put on a podcast of something you're listening to?" And so you like had this obscure Marvel podcast where they're listing off the 11 major Marvel properties, TV shows, and movies coming out this year, and ranking them. And there's 5 guests on the show. It sounded like it was a live stream recording, just like what we're doing, but obviously like a massive comment section. It was nobody I'd ever heard of, a show I'd never heard of. It wasn't from some bigger publishing company that I'd heard of. Like it was very much an indie thing that had, it sounded like there were probably writers on other sites and things like that in that, and like just that whole economy that's built around the fandom, which is nothing obviously new to anybody. It's not like I'm saying anything earth-shattering here, but it just is impressive looking back as we look back at Star Trek stuff and like the vacuum that you had to live in as someone who was remote from that stuff. If you weren't in a major center, you weren't going to Star Trek conventions or able to do that. You'd wait months to get the magazine from with pictures from whatever convention that Star Trek happened to be talking about something, and that was your experience of it. Whereas now my son can be like intimately involved and know all this stuff and have it regurgitated. Like we've started this refrain of like, do you know this for yourself and this is your opinion, or is this an opinion you're repeating from a podcast you listen to when we're talking about like a character? Like, it's not like life-changing information. It's just like whether Morbius is going to be good. Is that your opinion, or based on what you've seen, or is this just something you're regurgitating? Because it doesn't really matter, but just like it helps us frame the conversation. Because
no, and that's a really good like kind of parenting angle to all of this, right? Which is kind of media criticism. Like can you expose your kids to something you love without it kind of messing them up or turning them off? Can you share that, right? Like so we've done a little bit of Star Trek sharing in here, and obviously some Star Wars as well with our 8-year-old, and can you also talk about like, all right, this show is from the 90s, so we're gonna have to explain a few things that are gonna seem like awkward or actually downright and we haven't obviously shared some of the infamously bad episodes of Star Trek in that area yet, right? But kind of getting into that, do you understand what you're reading, what you're hearing? And in the podcast area, right? Like, okay, I've watched the new Star Trek episode, I can now listen to 3-4 plus
at least
Star Trek podcasts, and I'm sure there's dozens, right? That'll just go through and analyze the show and talk about things you missed or have a different opinion than you. And then there's even the official tie-in podcast, right? Like for Star Trek, Will Wheaton, who was Wesley Crusher on The Next Generation, like hosts a podcast every week interviewing like a cast member or a production crew or something about what the episode that was just released. And it's just a wild world of media consumption and criticism and it is that sort of at some point there's going to be a new Star Trek coming out that I'm just like, no, that's too much, right? It has to be. In theory. I don't think I can really watch something every single week year round on Paramount Plus, right? It'd just be too much.
By the way, we'll wrap up here, but just as a matter of interest, if you're curious about like parenting and kids and looking at just something you said there about referencing old stuff that might not be appropriate for kids, or just things from the 90s where it's just like, is that horribly racist now, and all those kind of questions. There was a podcast, they haven't published any episodes in a while, and I think they're sort of officially shut down, but Way Too Seriously on Good Stuff here is a podcast hosted by my brother-in-law and sister-in-law, where they took podcast or TV movies, kids movies, and some TV shows, and kind of just went a little way too seriously on them in a joking, fun way, obviously. And so, everything Frozen and Pokemon and all sorts of Spider-Verse, etc. All sorts of movies, kids movies that they took and discussed as adults, and then sometimes had their kids involved as well. So you can check that out. There's 100 and some episodes, so there's definitely, like, if you're looking for a show and just curious about a little bit of critical media analysis from a couple of parents, you can go back and dive into that catalog. So, but I think that's enough for this episode, anyways. And thanks for taking us onto Star Trek Corner. I don't know if there's enough content.
Yes,
well, like we said, there's probably enough for every episode, but
we've set course, and we're returning now to Earth. I'll try to keep this level of Star Trek out of the show in the future, but I really wanted to do kind of a deep dive for a little bit. And as new Trek games come out, I'm sure we'll have reason to talk about them, because it is something that I love and is a big part of our sort of family media experience here.
That is like one of the, again, in this world where there's infinite time and I can just create podcasts, not have to listen to other people's podcasts to make a living, but like the idea of taking my kids on a journey into Star Trek, because they've seen nothing, I think, really is fairly safe to say, and like doing a podcast series on them, like watching a movie, watching the first series, whatever, like, and they're seeing it and hearing about it through their lens now in 2022, and what they experience of Star Trek and how it looks and feels and sounds and whatever would be super fun. And then having you on as the expert, resident parental expert guest to like guide us in our journey or whatever would be a fun little side podcast series that maybe we'll do someday. But I think my kids are way too invested in the Marvel world to. My
poor dog-eared Star Trek: The Next Generation technical manual is within arm's reach, and if the kids have any questions about exactly how dilithium crystals work, I'm happy to answer them.
We've joked about doing like a summer camp with their uncle or whatever, who build stuff on YouTube and stuff, and for Star Trek summer camp with Nick. A week-long Zoom classes of like,
yes.
I don't want to do this anymore. Okay. On that note, if you've got ideas or thoughts for our show, we'd love to hear from you. Like I said earlier, 25C Arcade on Twitter is where you can find us there. But in the meantime, thank you for listening to 25 Cents, our video game podcast. You can find me on Twitter at iChris.
And you can find me on Twitter and almost everywhere else, probably talking about Star Trek, as Ultra Nerd. That's NURD.
And you can find 25 Cents wherever you listen to podcasts, of course. And be sure to check out the Good Stuff Patreon, patreon.com/goodstuff. And Goodstuff.network for all the other podcasts that are on Good Stuff, either active or not. Thanks for listening. Bye.
Bye.
Oh, I tried to hit it. It's funny because that audio, actually, I don't think I ever saw. That's from the original series, right? And it probably has been referenced in various
it's
ways.
been used, yeah.
But
for
it's
sure.
My first exposure to that, because we watched a bit of the original series. My friend who was a big Star Trek nerd started rewatching old stuff as well as he would like rewatch Next Generation over and over and over. Mm-hmm. But my first exposure to that music was actually from, do you know where? Can you guess what cultural? It either is like,
all right. It would be used in a meme, maybe on TikTok.
No, like so. In the '90s. This is still.
Okay.
Oh, can you see my screen? It'd be like 90s and a 90s movie that used it very prominently as a sort of comedic bit. It either is like on your radar. Oh, like most anything, obviously.
Is it? Let's see, what, like Dumb and Dumber? Maybe did they do that? No.
Very close.
90s comedy. Okay.
I'm gonna try and find the.
Ace
You can't
Ventura?
see my screen, right?
No,
cheating
no.
and look at my screen. Okay.
No.
I'll see if I can find it, and then I can play it just directly.
This might have been a movie that I was like a tiny bit too young for.
Oh, I'm sure. Like, there's no way your
at the
parents
time
would
it came
let
out.
you go to it if it was.
Yeah.
Like, it came out in '96, so you were.
I would have been 13, so
Yeah.
borderline maybe. But generally, yeah, it was not not just because of my parents, but like I was pretty sensitive to stuff on movies, so I was generally tracking a little younger than my peers in terms of visual media.
Oh, I gotta wait for ads to.
Oh.
Can I go full screen?
Shoot, now, what would have been a 90s comedy, slightly inappropriate, 1996 with Star Trek battle music?
All right.
Yeah, I got nothing.
It's like when Spock had to fight Kirk on Star Trek. Best friends forced to do
Oh,
battle.
Cable Guy.
Yeah.
Oh, they even have the props kind of.
Yep, this isn't funny. Will you stop it?
Anyways, you probably get slapped on Twitch for playing that now. But, like, I mean,
Yeah,
he
too
does
long-
reference
too
it
long
at
of
the
a segment.
beginning, where he's like, when Kirk had to fight Spock or whatever. But for me, that was like, I didn't know the song reference or the soundtrack reference or whatever that he was doing. But then, yeah, obviously, afterwards, went back to figure it out. But
Yeah, it's funny because I know we definitely rented that. So maybe like a year or two later, like when I was more into high school, we rented Cable Guy. I remember watching it, but I did not recall that. And at the time, I wouldn't have seen much of the original series at all yet. Like my exposure to the original series was actually my uncle's copy of the novelizations of every episode.
nice.
So I knew most of the plots, but I had never actually seen the original series show, just some of the movies.
Yeah.
Anyway,
That's awesome.
all right, where
Classic.
did I put? Yes, all right.
All right, I'm going to go out.
Uploaded my audio.
Some kids will be coming home shortly here. So Cool. We'll see
Yeah,
if
I should
we
probably go to
gain
my
like
real
10,000
job.
listeners because we've got
Bruh.
Star Trek now
Dang, I don't even know what I
on
want.
the hashtags.
Yes.
Or if
I'll make sure once it's published, I'll make sure to cross post to some Star Trek Discords, and we'll see if we get a listener spike there.
The problem is for all of them, it's like, oh yeah, I know all this. I have
Yeah.
all these games.
Oh, I've played way more games than this guy.
Yeah. It's not. That's always the funny thing is that it's not a deep enough
Casual.
dive. Yeah.
Yeah.
For them. Like, oh, you didn't talk about
Yeah.
the expansion pack that wasn't actually released. Why wouldn't you
Yeah.
mention that?
Yeah, the thing you could only get on floppy disk at
Yeah.
a Star Trek convention by like talking to the right person in
Yeah.
costume.
Exactly. Okay, cool. Thanks, Nick.
All right, that was
be in
fun.
touch.
Thanks,
Let's
Chris.
finish the stream.